Welcome to the Gavel. I'm Terry Ikumi. Now, after 13 years of trying and series of protests, the highly anticipated Petroleum Industry Bill has been passed by the National Assembly. To lawmakers, this is no small feat. They beat their chests and say that this is the biggest achievement of the National Assembly so far. The PIB contains 5 chapters, 319 clauses and 8 schedules. Chapter 1 deals with governance and institutions. Chapter 2 deals with administration. Chapter 3 handles the all-important host communities development, which seems to still be unsettled as the 2 chambers passed 2 different figures as operating costs due the host communities. 3% by the upper chamber and 5% by the House of Representatives. Well, that disparity would be addressed during concurrence. Chapter 4 looks at the petroleum industry fiscal framework, and Chapter 5 considers miscellaneous provisions. Here's a detailed report on the passage of the PIB by both chambers.
42.
Months after concluding public hearings on the Petroleum Industry Bill, the National Assembly on Thursday finally considered the reports of the committees of both chambers.
68, 69, 70, 71, 72.
It was first considered by the Green Chamber when amendments was made to the clause for host communities by the chairman of the Ad Hoc Committee on PIB, Mohammed Mungono.
It's supposed to be 5. Each settler work applicable through the operator shall make an annual contribution to the applicable host community development trust fund of an amount equal, my mic is on, of an amount equal to 5% of the actual operating expenditure in the immediately preceding calendar year in respect of all petroleum operations affecting the host communities for which the applicable host community development trust was established. So the 2% should be expunged, only 5%.
Deleted, not expunged.
Deleted.
Yes.
The rest of the consideration process was straightforward and the bill is passed.
I wanted to use this opportunity, Mr. Chairman.
Speaker of the House of Representatives applauded the passage of the bill and assured that similar attention will be given to the Electoral Act Amendment Bill.
In the next couple of weeks, we're going on our summer vacation. Even with this pace of landmark legislation, we're going out on a high. And I believe in the coming week, the electoral amendment will follow suit. And I believe by the time we're done on the 14th, irrespective of what side of the divide you are on, this House would have done the 9th Assembly and the Nigerian people proud.
Meanwhile, it was not so smooth in the Senate. After the report of the Committee on Petroleum was presented, the Deputy Senate President, Senator Ovie Omoagege, had some reservations.
The remediation we seek is not construction of pipelines. It's not construction of gas infrastructure. We want that money to be used to ameliorate the condition. And we understand, Mr. President, this is not a permanent thing. In fact, the goal is to make sure there's no gas flaring at some point. I understand that. But to the extent that there continues to be gas flaring, that's the rationale for this penalty. It's a penalty.
The Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Mr. Timipri Silva, and the Group Managing Director of the NNPC, Mr. Mele Kyari, were then ushered into the chamber for a closed-door meeting. Moments later, the consideration of the bill resumed with the President of the Senate putting each clause of the bill to vote.
So those in favor that clauses 1, 2, 3, and 4 stand part of this bill, say aye. Those against any, the ayes have it.
But a lawmaker from the Niger Delta region raised a concern.
Mr. President, this is a very serious matter. We are talking about 5%. The 5% is not too much. You have headed this place very well. We admire your administrative style. We agree with you on almost every issue. This one is a very naughty one, Mr. President. Very naughty. You are our leader. We are your followers. Please, Mr. President, lead us very well. This particular case that is before us is something that is very bitter for us to swallow.
The matter was put to vote, but the outcome was still not favorable for the lawmakers from the Niger Delta region who called for a division.
Mr. President,
It doesn't matter.
I am calling that
Let
the procedure for a division be taken and let's have a division.
Today, the host committee might be in the Niger Delta, but as we speak today, in the next couple of months, our people in Bauchi and Gombe will equally join the host community. So, Mr. President, there are two things, sir. One is that the unity of this Senate is more important and more valuable to each and every one of us here. Therefore, in achieving that unity, Mr. President, a shift will not change the situation.
The matter was eventually resolved and the PIB passed with the provision of 3% for host communities.
Let me say that the 9th Senate, and indeed the 9th National Assembly, has achieved one of its fundamental items on the legislative agenda.
Outside the Red Chamber, the Joint Committee on PIB explained to journalists how the Senate arrived at a conclusion of 3% for host communities, as against its recommendation of 5%.
As at today, what is going to go to these host communities is 3%. And 3% translates to over $500 million annually. $500 million is a lot of money. And you are talking about the operating expenditure of an oil company. So operating expenditure, that is before profit. So it's like he's dishing out money from his pocket and contributing to this fund. Now, we need to encourage investors to come in. So the more people come to invest, the more you get 3%. But if you leave it at 5%, maybe 10 investors will come. If you bring it down to 3%, maybe 20 investors will come. So that we expect a lot of investors to come in, and then a lot of this 3% will translate into even higher volume than we are expecting.
The initial report of the committee recommended amendments to a total of 752 provisions, out of which 56 are substantial amendments. It also recommended the unbundling of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation from being a regulatory body to a limited liability company in which members of the public can hold shares. Funding mechanism of 30% of NNPC Limited's profits to fund exploration of frontier basins around the country, and 5% of the actual annual operating expenditure of the preceding financial year in the upstream petroleum operations affecting the host communities for funding the host communities trust fund. While the passage of the PIB is considered a major breakthrough by the 9th Assembly, Nigerians await what percentage will be eventually transmitted to the President as provisions for host communities. 3% as passed by the Senate or 5% as passed by the House of Representatives, especially since the host communities had during the public hearings insisted on 10% of the operating cost. Meanwhile, Chairman of the Committee on Host Communities seems satisfied with the 5% provision and is optimistic that during concurrence with the Senate, the figure will not go lower.
We went round the Niger Delta and we had an aggregate opinion of 10%. But by the grace of God, we got 5%. I think that the feelers I'm getting, the calls I've received, the discussions I've had so far, point to the fact that the 5% is a good start. At the points where we had joint sittings as a committee, it was generally agreed on the 5%. I was surprised when I heard Senate pass 3% yesterday. But I don't think that's too much of a problem. I can speak for the House. We did what we stood by, and we got the 5%. And so I believe that there will be harmonization. There's going to be a conference. I also believe that a conference, whatever went wrong will be corrected. Because anything short of 5% will not sit well with the host communities. I can tell you that.
Now, away from the PIB, the House of Representatives was initially applauded by Nigerians when it seemed to wade into the matter of the Twitter suspension, which unsettled many Nigerians by embarking on an investigation. Now, the House was seen as more in touch with the people, especially since there was no mention of the matter in the Senate. However, that commendation may have been diminished following the recent stance of the House supporting the suspension after carrying out an investigation. It is worthy to note, however, that many members were opposed to the continuation of the suspension. The House Ad Hoc Committee on the Twitter suspension, which is made up of 5 committees, presented its report for consideration on Thursday after meeting with the Minister of Information and agencies under the ministry, following the directive of the leadership of the House.
The Minister of Information.
The committee was saddled with the responsibility of ascertaining the legality and circumstances surrounding the suspension of Twitter by the federal government.
The Joint Committee conducted an investigation hearing on Tuesday, 22 June 2021, with the Honorable Minister of Information and Culture in audience to brief the committee on the objectives of the intent and durations of the suspension of the Twitter in Nigeria. There are findings, and at the end of the findings, the Joint Committee recommended: 1, the time be allowed for the federal government of Nigeria and Twitter to enter into the dialogue process.
The Deputy Speaker was, however, dissatisfied with the output.
It's your recommendation that is making me to ask questions. And if we are passing recommendation on the decision taken by our government that affects international relationship, bordering on security and whatever are the laws, we should be able to explore first all the avenues in terms of our investigation before we come back to the floor.
Yes.
That's my take.
Deputy Minority Leader, the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker all disagreed on how effectively the committee carried out its responsibility based on its recommendations.
The quality and quantum of work we bring out here should carry all perspectives. I think the reference by NSA by the chairman was merely an example. If we are trying to establish a legal authority or the circumstances, it does not mean the opinion of the minister, who had already made his opinion known when he banned Twitter. Mr. Chairman, it would have been prudent that if you are talking about the consequences on Nigerians, the economic consequences, you would have invited Nigerians to express how it's affecting them economically.
Let us know, be cognizant of the fact that the issue of Twitter, or this particular issue, is unusual. It's not your clear-cut, whatever. It involves national security. It involves freedom of speech. It is a medium that we all know that it is almost novel. It's internet. So it must be handled delicately. The balance must be between national security and freedom of speech.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, but I think I want us to be a little bit so that we are writing reports. And if we are writing reports, I want to beg so that you don't give them the cover, and tomorrow we'll run into problem. We may run into problem because, on the matter that has been raised, I was the first to raise the matter, and I'm convinced beyond reasonable doubt that truly they need to have exhausted more avenues in terms of their own destiny. I just wrote one point. It borders on security, and if it borders on security, just for the mere fact that the motion in its body content says invite the minister, does not stop them or preclude them from inviting the national security advisor.
The Deputy Minority Leader then proposed an amendment which he believes was in the interest of the people, but the majority of the lawmakers voted against it.
The federal government should take into cognizance the negative effect of the Twitter suspension on Nigerians who depend on the platform for their livelihood, and should therefore lift the ban on Twitter.
No.
I so move.
Those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Against, say nay. Do I put the question again? The nays have been, the ayes have been, the nays have been.
While the majority of the lawmakers voted to keep the suspension on, many Nigerians may still question its legality, especially with the ruling of the ECOWAS court preventing the federal government from prosecuting Nigerians who still use Twitter. Let's take a look at some more matters raised at the National Assembly, including the bill for appointment of young people and persons with disabilities into government positions at both state and national levels. The report on the 2021 budget of the Nigeria Police Trust Fund was presented to the Red Chamber by the Chairman, Senate Committee on Police on Tuesday.
Total budget recommended by the committee is 74.7 billion.
But there were concerns over some projects in the budget.
All the barracks in Anambra State are nothing to write home about. I can't see any police station or any barracks in the rehabilitation column.
Page 12, we have rehabilitation of 4-man RF quarters, 2-bedroom bungalow, Onitsha, Anambra State.
Meanwhile, the bill seeking to amend the Firearms Act of 2004 has been passed by the Senate after consideration of the report submitted by the Committee on Judiciary, Human Rights and Legal Matters. The amendment seeks to, among other things, ensure coordinated disarmament process and destruction of illegal firearms. Speaking to journalists after plenary, sponsor of the bill, Senator Ubasani, said the amendment of the act became necessary in view of increasing cases of firearms proliferation.
About 500 million illegal weapons and firearms in circulation in West African sub-region. About 350 million are domiciled here in Nigeria. That represents about 70%. So it's a serious situation. And of course, with the current crisis of insecurity in our own country, I believe some of us have to come with our support from the National Assembly to look at our laws.
Meanwhile, lawmakers in the Green Chamber resumed plenary on Tuesday after 2 weeks of recess to mark the end of their second session. The Speaker read a communication from President Muhammadu Buhari for the consideration of the 2021 supplementary budget.
It has become necessary to prepare the 2021 Supplementary Appropriation Bill considering the urgent need to make provisions for procurement and administration of COVID-19 vaccines. The availability of COVID-19 vaccines and the procurement terms were still uncertain as at the time of finalizing the 2021 budget. Hence, there was no provision in the 2021 Appropriation Act for the procurement and administration of COVID-19 vaccines. We have limited the supplementary budget proposal to just these critical and emergency areas of need due to our severe fiscal constraints. All other needs will be deferred to the 2022 budget, which we plan to present in September of this year.
As plenary progressed, a point of order was raised by Representative Mark Gbila, drawing the attention of the House to the failure of the Committee on Banking and Currency to act on his motion against the CBN's freezing of accounts of EndSARS protesters last year.
Mr. Speaker, my point of order is based on a motion. By the grace of God, I had the privilege as a member of this honorable House to raise regarding questions of the legality of the CBN's ability to freeze accounts of Nigerian citizens, an issue that affected members of my constituency and me personally, and teeming hapless Nigerians, some of who have lost their lives. The rule says any matter referred to a committee shall be treated within 30 days. Otherwise, the committee shall stand discharged. Note, Mr. Speaker, sir, it says shall stand discharged after 60 days, except upon a motion for extension of time, which shall not exceed 15 days, and the matter committed to the Committee of the Whole or any other committee as the Speaker may decide from time to time.
Then the Deputy Speaker took over as the House considered a report from the Committee on Health to address issues associated with treatment of gunshot injuries. The House also considered and approved the report of the Committee on Defense recommending the confirmation of the Chief of Army Staff, Major General Farouk Yahaya.
The nominee gave very apt answers to our questions, having been battle-tested as theater commander in the Lafia Dole command, that is locally. Internationally, he's fought battles in Sierra Leone and Liberia. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, we recommend that the nominee be confirmed as ECOWAS.
Meanwhile, the House of Representatives has mandated its Committee on Army to investigate the activities of the Nigerian Army over alleged non-payment of 663 billion naira non-regular allowances to its personnel over the past 2 years.
Aware that increment was captured in the Manual of Finance Administration (MAFA) and approved for implementation by the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Nigeria on 26 January 2018. Concerned that despite the increment in budgetary provision for non-regular allowances from 283 billion in 2020 to about 380 billion in 2021, the welfare of Army personnel have not felt the corresponding effect, and personnel of Nigerian Army involved in internal security operations, training and performance of other military duties are still being owed various types of non-regular allowances.
A bill for an act to amend the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to provide for the inclusion of young persons and persons with disabilities in appointments in Nigeria scaled second reading in the House of Representatives on Thursday. The bill, which was sponsored by the Speaker, seeks to bring the issue of disability to the concurrent list so that states can also provide for the welfare of persons with disabilities effectively. The bill, according to the Speaker, gives an opportunity for leaders to demonstrate their genuine commitment to political empowerment and inclusion of young people and persons with disabilities.
Members could call that in the 8th Assembly, this House passed the not too young to run. This one seeks to enshrine into the Constitution the powers of inclusion of young persons and persons living with disability. Let them be appointed into sensitive positions as ministers, as commissioners, as executive secretaries. We cannot limit them just to elected positions. Even when we gave them powers to be elected, they have been encumbered to contest those elections because of financial reasons. It is within this context that the Speaker thought it wise to promulgate, to push forward this very, very important bill, that the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria should be amended to include persons living with disability as commissioners, as ministers.
Outside the chamber, the House of Representatives Joint Committee on Finance, Banking and Currency is querying Nigerian banks on alleged complicity in non-collection of taxes from companies in excess of $30 billion in annual Federation tax revenue between 2005 and 2019. Chairman of the House Committee on Finance, James Falike, made this point during an investigative hearing on alleged annual revenue leakages arising from payments on account of foreign currency denominated contracts by companies as well as foreign exchange allocation to companies. The lawmakers are questioning why the skyrocketing amounts of foreign direct investments and capital importations are not being reflected in the economic progress of the country.
The committee deemed it imperative to investigate revenue leakages and loopholes in the system that have contributed to a loss of over $30 billion in annual Federation tax revenue between 2004 and 2019. The committee has noted the following major infractions which have multiplier effects on our infractions. Liftings of some crude oil and gas by oil exploration companies that were not wholly or unlegally allocated to the consignors in JV, PSC, and PSC exploration activities, inflow of foreign investments in the form of equity, foreign cash loans, equipment loans, whose utilizations are majorly subject to tax, end up in transactions, foreign transfer that were at variance with the purpose of such inflows. Overnight, a fictitious disappearance of naira proceeds of foreign inflows from the bank accounts of Nigerian beneficiaries and subsequent allocations of foreign exchange by CBN for capital repatriation, principal loan repayments, and interest payments.
Well, that's all the time for the Gavel this week. Thanks for watching. I'm Terry Ikumi. Goodbye.